Hello everybody. This video is going to be all about drug tolerance and physical and psychological dependence. Alright, so we're going to start off with drug tolerance. So what is drug tolerance? Drug tolerance is any state in which the body reacts, or the sensitivity of the body to a drug declines over time. So the body reacts to the drug less over time. So drug tolerance can be due to a couple of different mechanisms, a couple of different functions that happen. One, metabolic tolerance. So what this is your body essentially burns or metabolizes the chemical to more efficiently. So your liver, for example, produces enzymes, which are just chemicals that break down other chemicals in your system. When your metabolic tolerance rises, the enzymes in your liver will break down that chemical to more quickly. So, for example, if you develop metabolic tolerance to alcohol, then your liver burns the alcohol faster than it can get to your brain and affect your mental state, preventing you from experiencing the psychological effects of alcohol. For example, if you watch the first Captain America movie, towards the end of the movie, he was trying to get drunk, but he couldn't because his metabolism was so high. So this is an example of, it's a nerdy comic book example, my favorite kind, but still of, metabolism being so high that it burns it. So one way that we can develop a drug tolerance is by our bodies becoming more efficient at burning the chemical. Therefore, we have to drink or take more of whatever chemical it is in order to feel the psychological effects. Another mechanism of drug tolerance is functional tolerance. Now, functional tolerance is the result of changes in how your brain reacts to the drug. Now, that can happen for a number of different reasons. One, it can happen because the number of receptors that your brain has that responds to that particular chemical decrease. In general, your brain tries to compensate anytime it becomes aware that there are excessive amounts of a particular chemical. It tries to maintain a homeostasis. So when it discovers an excess amount, it will reduce the number of receptors so as to restore the balance. That can reduce the effect of a particular chemical on our psychological state. You might also get functional tolerance from differences in binding efficiencies. Specifically, the chemical might bind to your neurons' receptors less efficiently, thus developing greater tolerance, meaning that the drug can't affect your neurons to the same extent. The third method is through the diminished impact on the neuron. So let's say that your neuron the chemicals do bind to the neuron, and they do affect some change in the neuron. But the neuron, over time, as drug tolerance or functional tolerance increases, the neuron can react to the drug's presence less and less and less. So as when you first take a drug, it might have a profound excitatory or profound inhibitory effect. After so long, the neuron can begin to react to that chemical to a lesser extent, which means whereas it may have initially had a profound excitatory effect, it still has an excitatory effect, but not to the same extent. Or if it initially had an inhibitory effect, it may still have an inhibitory effect, but again, not to the same extent. Now, tolerance can lead to, so we've talked about drug tolerance, but this can also lead to dependence. So physical dependence refers to a state in which you have basically your body needs it. So it's a physiological state of need for the chemical. So much so that if the chemical is absent, so let's say you quit taking it, you begin experiencing withdrawal symptoms. Now, withdrawal symptoms are unpleasant experiences, and usually they're defined by what pleasant experiences the drug provided. So, if you let's say you drank alcohol. Well, it's a depressant, and so it would lower the activity of your central nervous system. Well, if you drank it a lot, then when you stopped drinking it, you would find that your mind specifically, you could experience insomnia. All right, so because, you know, let's say you drank to go to sleep at night. Well, it's a depressant, so it makes your central nervous system shut down, slow down, making it easier for you to go to sleep. But if you did that consistently and then you quit drinking, then you would notice that it would take longer and longer and longer for you to go to sleep. All right, so withdrawal symptoms are largely the opposite of whatever experiences taking the drug gave you. All right, now sometimes these can be a very extreme depending on how dependent you are on the drug. Many times, though, these symptoms or these withdrawal symptoms include pain and obviously craving for the drug. I mean, again, physical dependence involves your body acting like you need the drug. Remember, kind of what I was talking about with tolerance, the brain tries to maintain a homeostasis. If you continually present a new substance, it modifies its function in order to offset the excessive amount. But it acts as if that chemical should be there. And so when you stop taking the chemical, suddenly that chemical is gone because your brain's no longer producing it. And so your brain begins to react as if it's missing something because, as far as it's concerned, it is. So you will typically, in the same way, you know, you might tend to prefer certain foods when you're lacking a particular vitamin. The same thing happens when you're no longer taking a drug, and your brain experiences an absence of the chemicals that it or experiences its absence. It creates a craving for that drug. Now, that's physical dependence. Psychological dependence is far more behavioral. So specifically, when we start taking drugs, we become conditioned to experience certain behaviors, and those behaviors become habitual. So, for example, for smokers, you know, they get used to doing this. All right, drinkers, they get used to drinking something around a particular time when they were ordinarily drinking. You know, there are certain social events or social cues that tend to coincide with each of these. With taking each of these drugs. And so psychological dependence largely refers to when you become psychologically dependent on a particular drug, you also have a desire to repeat drug use for habitual reasons, as I mentioned, or maybe even emotional reasons. You know, so specifically, if you were taking alcohol to resolve or to cope with some emotionally traumatic event, then you may continue to use alcohol in order to cope with that psychological event. So that's also a type of psychological dependence. All right, so that's everything that I wanted to talk about in this video. That's drug tolerance. We talked about drug tolerance. We've talked about physical dependence, and we've talked a little bit about psychological dependence. If you have any questions, please send them my way. But other than that, that's it for this video. Take it easy, everybody.